Okay, and we are back to recording. So, part two, markets and support systems that empower people with disability. Now, this is what I think the most important part of this whole section should be. I was not impressed by the recommendations. Like they weren't bad, just they didn't seem to address what I believe are the core issues with the NDIS, which is the economics of the NDIS. And I do believe that almost every issue with the NDIS is going to continue. Almost every single one. There are some things that will change if the recommendations are taken on board, which mostly seems to affect entry, like getting onto the NDIS, which is great. In theory, it's great. And some elements of the admin of the NDIS. But most of the issues with the NDIS are economic or logistic in nature. The logistic side of that is almost entirely dependent on the economic side of that due to it being private companies. And so you need to fix the economics to fix the rest of the NDIS. And I didn't see pretty much anything to do with that in the review, and the one section where it might have been could easily have been referring to something else. So let's actually read this section and see what it actually says and proposes. Alright, so this is a quote. Carers are often put in difficult situation of trying to navigate and find services. This is a hit and miss lucky dip scenario where one has no idea of the quality of service. Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, there's a lot. Let's start. Let's just get going. All right. Accessible, timely, and reliable information to improve market functioning and scheme integrity. I've already commented on the reliability of information being a problem because they will often add things to documentation but won't remove things from documentation. But let's actually read it. On this page, blah, blah, blah. Skip the contents. Cool. Participants, providers, and governments don't have the information they need. Correct. We've heard from participants that NDIS markets are not yet working as intended. Current information on what supports can be purchased, what supports are available, and the prices and quality of supports is often hard to find or understand. This affects their ability to exercise informed choice and control over their supports. Correct. A quote. There is an overwhelming amount of information on the website. Not easy to try to understand if you are able to purchase something. There often seems to be conflicting information, and I don't want to live in fear of being audited and have to repay or have self-managed revoked, which is what some people are claiming. Oh, absolutely. I know people who've actually had stuff be audited and get revoked after they had previously gotten permission for it. Or they had checked and they got verbal permission, not written permission, which was part of the problem. But the other problem was that they would look and the documentation would say, it says that I can do this thing, and then they would be told, but you can't. It doesn't matter what the document says, we are telling you can't. And so they got screwed over because the information that they've had was not reliable. And I've had similar situation. I haven't been screwed over in the terms of an audit or having to repay, but I didn't spend money that should have been spent because I got the wrong information. So that is absolutely a thing. Understanding complex information across different sources requires significant time and effort from participants, their family, carers, and their intermediaries, such as support coordinators and plan managers. Working out how NDIS funding can be used is too confusing and complicated. Quote, how confusing it is. It baffles me that it is so hard for us to use and access because we have troubles with the things we need to do to get help. No one informs you what things are, including what you can use those allocated things for. Oh, yeah, absolutely. The categories of the budget are incredibly limiting, and sometimes they don't actually clearly tell you what the boundaries are. So there are a whole bunch of things that are just like, it looks like I can spend money here, but you actually can't. Or it's, you can't spend money in these areas. But turns out there is something in those areas that money can be spent on, but it's just completely obfuscated by the fact that logic says that that is not an area you can spend the money on. I'm not going to get into examples, let's keep going. It takes a lot of time and effort for participants to find providers. Oh, I'll talk about this. It is too clumsy for, this is a quote, it is too clumsy for participants and too hard to find providers easily. All the info is dumped into complicated documents and Australia-wide rather than state-based and sector-based. How are disabled people and their stressed carers supposed to navigate this? That's a quote from a carer. So one of the ways you're supposed to be able to navigate this is they have carer expos, and, you know, like the providers come out and they advertise themselves and so on and so forth. I'd like to emphasize that they advertise themselves. I have, in this room somewhere, unfortunately I don't know where because my room recently got cleaned up, but I have the best example. So, those expos are often designed, like, the people who are there are marketing experts. These are the people who are good at selling themselves and advertising. They don't actually talk about what services they provide. They don't actually talk about what they do that other providers don't do. They're just trying to get your attention and get you talking to them and pitch you and sell their business to you without promising any specifics or actually giving you a reason for what they do that everybody else doesn't do. And sometimes this is incredibly blatant in terms of what marketing gimmicks they use. And this is the thing I have in my room somewhere. I have a lolly bag. Because one of these providers was just handing out lolly bags in order to try and get people's attention so that people would... And they treated, like, the way they talked about disabled people was very infantilizing. But most importantly, the lolly bag couldn't be opened without using your teeth or a pair of scissors. It was thick plastic. Myself and my mother and my sister, if I recall correctly, there was I think it was a care worker. Sorry, I can't remember who the third person was in the car with us. But we all tried to open it. We all had to use our teeth. And we managed, like, we had two of these bags. We opened one of them. And the other bag I still have here. It is still sealed. And it's just like, yeah, this is the most... Like, somebody in a room somewhere was just like, hey, you know what's a great idea? Let's give lolly bags to the disabled people. Did you even check to see if they could open it? Did you even check to see if able-bodied people could open it? It's insane. But that, like, there were so many examples like that. Like, that was the best example. But those expos are just, they're trying to convince carers. And they're trying to convince carers that don't necessarily even understand the nuance of their disabled person's needs. They are not talking to disabled people at all. Even when we were going from, you know, stall to stall, they often tried to talk to my mother, not to me. So yeah, it's sales. That's what it is. It's sales. And that is the main way that you... Well, one of the ways that you can find providers and actually try and find out if they're good for you or not. And when you're talking to a sales team, that's not good. Anyway, the current NDIS provider finder tool... Oh yeah, literally forgot about the provider finder tool, but let's talk about that too. Only provides basic information on available registered providers in a participant's local areas. However, this information can be unreliable and is often not enough for participants to find and choose suitable service providers. Many participants and their decision supporters rely on word-of-mouth information and advice from other participants, especially people they know and trust, or help from an intermediary such as an LAC or support coordinator with varying outcomes. Yeah, absolutely. Also, LACs aren't supposed to do that. Like, if an LAC does that, they can actually be fired because they're not supposed to advise on providers. Your support coordinator is supposed to, but your LAC is not supposed to. You know, the only thing an LAC is supposed to do is basically point you to the NDIS provider finder tool and just talk you through the information that is on that tool, not provide word of mouth about are they good, are they bad, or give ratings. And that's what you need. Like, that's the entire part that you need. So yeah, the provider finder tool is not good. And the fact that you can't leave reviews is also a problem. And I realize that review bombing can be a fundamental problem with anywhere that reviews are able to be left, but the ability to leave reviews is really important. The ability to leave comments is very important. So they need to find a way to do that. And even if the reviews are very formalized and there is a proper survey you have to complete for them, or you have to register using your NDIS account number because you'll have a participant number. So that way it guarantees, in theory, guarantees that all the reviews are being left by disabled people who hopefully are confirmed previous or current people who have used that provider. Like, if they have those sorts of mechanisms in place, it could actually be really useful and really effective. But at the moment, it's not even as good as a brochure. And those brochures are at the expos that I just told you about. And, you know, at least at the expos, you can talk to these people, and even if they're a sales team and can't actually answer the question, that's still more information than the provider finder gives you. So yeah, like, the provider finder is basic. It is very basic. It's not inherently bad, but it's definitely basic and not nearly enough. Alright, current NDIS digital systems make it difficult for many participants to make informed purchasing decisions when managing their funding. Oh, hell, oh yes, oh yes. While the National Disability Insurance Agency has made efforts to improve its processes and systems, managing and monitoring spending is still challenging and administratively burdensome for many participants. Paying providers can take a lot of work and can be slow. Tracking how much funding participants have, and in what budgets, as well as how much funding has been used, can be difficult. More than half of all participants are choosing to use a plan manager, where they get more choice over providers compared to agency management, and it can be administratively easier compared to self-management. Yeah, I am plan managed, and I wanted to do it myself, right? I chose to be plan managed so that I could take the time to learn from my plan manager, so that I could learn what I needed to know in order to become self-managed. And what I've discovered is that I need to be plan managed. I can get the skills to be self-managed, but those skills are best used in a partnership with a plan manager. They are not best used with me trying to run it. Not with my disability, not with my episodes, not with the risk that I could double pay someone. That is a problem I have in fact had in the past, is, oh, I've paid you, and then I have an episode, and I don't remember I paid them. And so I pay them again, because I forget that I had already paid them. Like, that is a legitimate problem for me. That is not a legitimate problem for a lot of other disabled people, but it is for some. But it is a legitimate problem for the system, that the system should be able to account for, and it does by me partnering with a plan manager. So yeah, I actually really support plan managers, but the thing is that, as I said elsewhere, it's good that they're optional. The correct choice should come down to the disabled party, and what the correct choice is for them will differ from what it is for me. So anyway, a quote: "Being plan managed means I can choose my providers without the hassle of self-management." Yeah, absolutely. Also, it gives you someone to fight on your behalf against those providers. If somebody isn't doing their job, your plan manager can call them up on it, or can let you know of a discrepancy that you yourself may have missed. So I'm a big fan of that. Anyway, however, there is significant confusion about who should be doing what in helping participants to understand, use, and manage funding. True. As at 30th of June 2023, over 65% of all active participants have access to 2 or more intermediaries, with over half of these participants having funding for support coordination and plan management. Also, with a lot of those participants having funding that is too small to cover those individuals. I am one of those people who my admin budget is way below what it should be. I think my admin budget essentially comes to 1 hour a week. That's what... sorry, not 1 hour a week. 1 hour a month is what it was. Because it was 14 hours effectively a year. And that's it. That was my entire admin budget. for my support coordinator. And that is not nearly enough, especially, like, even if I wasn't in a complex scenario, that's not nearly enough. That's not, like, a quick check-in for 1 hour a month is all that is. That's not enough to actually do anything with the check-in. Anyway, there's a couple of quotes here. The person who is helping our participant understand and decide how to use their funding is often the support coordinator, not the plan manager. Correct. Absolutely. Like, that has been 100% my experience. And I have a good plan manager. Confusion in responsibilities has led to variability in what plan managers do and help participants with. There can often be a lack of shared understanding of how funding can be used, delays in payment being made to service providers, and risks to the integrity of the scheme. It is evident and widely reported that a proportion of intermediaries fail to properly understand their roles and responsibilities, and this is adversely impacting quality and safety. Absolutely. That quote was from the SDA Alliance. That is absolutely the case. I have actually had a good run, as I said, with my plan manager, but I often have to ask the same questions to my plan manager, my support coordinator, and my LAC, and also my provider. Like, I often have to contact all four of them to get a reliable answer, and sometimes all four of them give me a different answer. And all four of them, well, not always all four of them, but usually, like, because I did have a good LAC. I don't really know my new LAC yet, but my former LAC was amazing. My plan manager is great. One of my past coordinators was not great, but my previous one and my current one were both great. And it sucks because I moved on to the new, as I don't regret moving to my new coordinator. I think I said plan manager. I don't regret moving to my new coordinator at all, but at the same time, I don't like that I lost the previous one, because the reason that I transitioned was because I was promised, we were told that something was going to be in my plan that my current coordinator at the time couldn't do. Like, they were not skilled in independent living, and so I needed a new coordinator who was, and then the plan arrived, and I hadn't been approved for independent living. So I've had 2 out of 3 great coordinators. But yeah. Anyway, they need training. They need to know, why do I have to bounce between coordinators? Because it's taken me 2 years for the NDIS to recognize that I need independent living. And even if that wasn't the case, why is my coordinator, why are they not already trained in these things? Why is that not part of it? And there could be good reasons for that, not least of which being there's so much that they need to be aware of and know. But constantly bouncing from coordinator to coordinator, having to retrain the coordinators in my disability because nobody is qualified in my disability, it's a mess. It is absolutely a mess, and it should not be like this. It may have to be like this, but it should not be like this. Anyway. This is another quote, when there is not enough education or support for people who do not have the benefit of having a support coordinator, organizations, plan managers, and support workers end up doing the job for them. Yeah. This is unpaid work, and it is also dangerous, as they may not have the correct information, and often think they are helping people by saying something like, you can get XYZ because I know someone who got it paid for by their plan. Oh, yeah, this exactly. I've encountered this in a lot of places. I've had some people recommend, say, just like, yeah, you can get this thing on NDIS, to which my response is, only if I've been previously approved for it, which I haven't. For example, a wheelchair. I've been fighting to be allowed to buy a wheelchair for 2 years. Still not able to get it. I own a wheelchair, but that wheelchair isn't actually enough. The brakes are in the wrong place. It is very heavy, very cumbersome. We had to make our own seatbelt because it didn't have a seatbelt. We had to self-modify the wheelchair in order for it to be passable for my needs, and it's still not great. Um, yeah. But I can't get a replacement, not without forking out money from my own wallet. Um, anyway. Next, current NDIS processes and systems could better enable market stewardship, monitoring, and protect the scheme from non-compliance, sharp practice, and fraud. Yeah, I would say that they are enabling those things, but let's read what they've got. Current NDIS processes and systems don't provide governments with sufficient information to protect the integrity of the scheme and allow governments to monitor and steward the market. Absolutely. There's very little oversight. There's very little oversight of the providers. There's very little oversight. The complaint system have very little power to actually enforce things. And a lot of the time, if you want something to actually happen, you have to go through the process of either litigation or a lawsuit, depending on whether you're doing it through the NDIS or against the provider. And that is just... you're making the most vulnerable people and the least able group to actually do that sort of thing have to go through these heavy legal and bureaucratic processes just to get outcomes. Yeah. Yeah, just to resolve outcomes of abuse. Anyway, governments can only see part of the market based on NDIA and plan managed transactions. Data about whether the supports meet participants' needs and are effective in delivering outcomes is not collected in a coordinated way. Correct. To know how the market is working and what support approaches work best. Incomplete data and limited market visibility also make it difficult to understand the nature and scale of non-compliance, sharp practice, and fraud occurring across the scheme. Look, yes and no. I don't think it makes it difficult to understand the nature of. The scale, yes. But a lot of the difficulties, the nature of that can be deduced simply by looking by asking economists and businesses to take a look at the current existing setup and basically ask them the question, what loopholes would you apply to this? How would you profit from this? How would you set up a business to actually maximize profit? That is the question you ask. And that is the question that private institutions will always ask because they're private companies. Even if they're doing a good thing at the same time, they need to collect the profit in order to actually keep functioning. So they will ask themselves that question. It just might not be the highest priority. You can understand the nature of these things. What you can't necessarily understand without complete data is the scale. And that tells you which of these, hey, look, here are 20 different ways that people can abuse the system. We've measured it, and these 6 are the dominant ones. You can't do that without the measurement. But the baseline nature, you can get a lot of that just by looking at what NDIS is putting out there and what the legislation is and what the pricing scheme is. But the other side of the fence is non-compliance. Yeah, yeah, like all of that sort of thing. There's so much of it, and I've talked about it enough. Let's keep going. A quote. Providers can claim payment from NDIA or plan managers without confirmation from participants that the services were provided. Correct. Similarly, self-managed participants can submit claims for payment without providing evidence of services provided, although they are expected to retain evidence. These payment arrangements pose a high risk of fraud. Absolutely. And accidental fraud happens as well. For example, you can pay someone in advance, and that person may not actually do the job for whatever reason. And then you can have an issue of either getting that money back or spending that time in future and being like, okay, you didn't make it to those shifts, but can you do some other ones in future? All of that sort of back and forth can be problematic and difficult, but also it doesn't show up on the data that the NDIA receive. They can't even necessarily detect the fraud unless the client, the participant, identifies it themselves, and raises it as a complaint. Plan managers may not necessarily be able to identify the fraud because if there hasn't been confirmation, they can't do that. I've had issues on this front. Funnily enough, I've had the opposite issue where provider has forgotten to charge me and has just straight up failed to actually submit the invoices, which was a problem for a lot of different reasons. But it's an unusual problem, and I hope that's not the norm. I wouldn't expect it to be the norm, but it was definitely a weird one. Anyway, that quote came from ANAO report on effectiveness of the National Disability Insurance Agency's management of assistance with daily life supports 2023. Anyway, without sufficient market visibility, it is difficult for governments to send timely and appropriate market signals to service providers about potential opportunities and supply gaps in the market or protect scheme integrity. Interesting choice of statements there. All of that is absolutely true. But why is it protect scheme integrity and not participants? Why is it about the potential opportunities and the gaps for providers to exploit and not anything about the participant? That actually concerns me because it feels like it's treating the participants and their needs as an afterthought in this section. It feels like this is all about, hey, how do we make things better for the private companies? We make sure that they're, doing their job and that they're actually complying and not committing fraud. But how do we use this data to make things better for the private companies? Not how do we use this data to make things better for the participant. That actually concerns me, that section. Anyway, this is a weird subsection. The panel's vision, investment is needed in the digital and data infrastructure of the NDIS. Okay, so we have talked about this when I was going through the recommendations. I'm just going to speed through this. It becomes easier for providers to set up to deliver supports, easier for participants and providers to connect with each other, easier for participants to pay providers and manage their budgets. Yeah, all of that is true, but they do have a little bit about informed spending decisions. Look, all of that is good. Moving digital is good, but I'm concerned about where the focus is going to be. Because at the end of the day, if your focus is on supporting the private companies over supporting the disabled parties, you've got a problem. And something that's important, you can't say we're trying to do both, right? You need to set a priority between those two things. Is your primary purpose to support providers, or is your primary purpose to support the disabled? One of them has to be secondary, because those two things are often in direct conflict and are directly at odds. And you need to make a choice. And this does not seem to be making that choice. Or if it is making that choice, it's what the problem I raised up there is that seems to be making the choice to be for providers, not for participants. And this should all be participant focused. Anyway, continuing on, these investments into the digital stuff would help participants and their navigator have access to timely, reliable information, empowering them to act as informed consumers in the market. Yes, there we go. That is what I was looking for above. It would also give providers more timely market signals. Better information could improve provider responsiveness and encourage greater innovation in delivering supports to meet the diverse needs of participants. Providers would also have more market information to benchmark their performance and prices. Okay, so this is exactly what I was after, right? Participant was mentioned first, this was talked about first, and then the provider was talked about second. All of this is important. All of this stuff for providers is important, because of the current economic setup and the fact that it's private companies providing the services instead of a public system providing the services. So all of this is important, but it's important that the stuff for providers is what comes first. The stuff for participants is what comes first, providers second. Moving on, a range of technologies and channels would improve digital inclusion for participants. This would deliver a digital experience tailored to the diverse needs of people with disability, including people with an intellectual disability. Good. Participants and service providers would be supported to communicate more easily with each other through faster digital transactions. At the same time, safeguards for I have an ability to say words. For